Okay. Again, handouts are in the chat. And with that, let's get started. So good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Godero with 3C Ren, and I'm here today to introduce Russ King, who's going to be teaching a class on understanding heat pump water heaters for building departments. But before we get into that content, I'm just going to tell you all a little bit about 3C Ren. Next slide.
And the right button here. There we go. Oh, bear with me. There we go.
So everyone is pretty familiar with Zoom at this point. Please stay muted and feel free to put any questions in the chat. As the chat is pinged, I will make sure to flag Russ with any questions, and there will be time for questions at the end, or really whenever Russ says so. And you're also welcome to use the raise your hand feature during those times. Next slide. So 3C Ren, we serve San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, and we offer energy programming and services for building professionals and households, and we are funded by ratepayer dollars, which is a small public goods tax on everybody's utility bills. Next slide. I will be the 3C Ren staff online today, so if you have any questions about 3C Ren or anything else really, feel free to message me directly. Next slide. And then just briefly, we offer 3 programs with 3C Ren. Next. The first is Energy Code Connect, which is the program that is bringing you this course today. We serve all building and code officials in the Tri-County, including our Energy Code Coach, which is a live field support specialist that can answer your code questions, trainings and support such as the ones today, and regional forums, although I think our next regional forum will be taken over by the Quebec conference in Cambria, which is happening later this year. More details to follow. Next slide. We also have our building performance training, which delivers technical and soft skills for workers in the industry. You can grow your development, your business by getting trained and certified or start a new career. Next slide. And then finally, we have our home energy savings program, which caters to multifamily dwellings, 5 or more units, and offers rebates. Or for single family, we pass on our incentives to contractors to do energy efficient installations. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Russ. I will post the handouts in the chat just one more time for anyone who might not have accessed the chat previously. And yeah, take it away, Russ.
Awesome. Thanks, Gray. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Russ King, and I'm a longtime trainer for BayRen and 3C Ren. And this is a class that is a cooperatively trained class between BayRen and 3C Ren. We share materials, and that way we're not reinventing the wheel on certain things. And this particular class was developed by BayRen a couple years ago at the request of several building departments who were like, "What the heck is this heat pump water heater stuff that we're starting to see, and are they allowed, and how are they dealt with the energy code and things like that?" There was a section of the code a while back, I want to say in the 2016 version, that said you could not replace a gas water heater with an electric water heater. And what they were talking about was resistance electric water heaters, because heat pump water heaters were not really popular or well known back then, and they certainly are now. And they are an electric water heater. You are allowed to replace a gas water heater with a heat pump water heater, but not a resistance electric water heater. And it's a really interesting technology. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is a little bit of an unusual class for what we normally do. This is more about a certain technology. And then we're going to talk about how it's specifically addressed by the code and the energy code and things like that. So that's what this class is all about. So today's learning objectives is to understand the fundamentals of unitary or individual heat pump water heaters. We abbreviate that HPWH, heat pump water heaters, to be able to identify heat pump water heaters in the field, to understand the energy code requirements for heat pump water heaters, and to become familiar with the compliance forms and documents, so the CEC forms that you have to deal with all the time. And then we're going to talk about some best practices related to energy code compliance. So we're going to talk about identifying heat pump water heaters first. We're actually going to talk a little bit about the 2022 energy code. As you know, we just started the new energy code on January 1st of this year, and there's a few little things that are new that we're going to talk about today. But we're going to talk about specifically how the heat pump water heaters are addressed. As you probably know, the 2022 energy code it's one of the first times that it's how should I say this, the goal of the energy code is not just saving energy, that the goal of the energy code this year, due to mandates put on the Energy Commission by legislature and the governor and things like that, is to reduce greenhouse gases. And so that to do that, we need to incentivize electrical use as opposed to gas and fossil fuels. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the forms, always lots and lots of forms when you deal with the energy code. And we'll talk about some special resources that have been developed specifically for water heating and heat pump water heaters in general. And then we'll talk about some best practices. And then at the end, we'll have some Q&A if I don't run too long, which I'm sort of notorious for. But today's class is scheduled to go until 10:30. And we do have a lot of slides, so let's dive in. All right, so actually, Gray posted a link in the chat to some handouts. One of them is the PDF version of these slides, so you can refer to them later on. But there's also a couple other tools that were developed by BayREN, but they work for any building department. One is it's a building code assistance sheet, so it's kind of a quick reference guide for water heaters in general and heat pump water heaters. There's a permit template that they developed too that's kind of interesting. We'll go through that. And then there's a handout called the compliance process for residential new construction and additions that we use that in a lot of our training to sort of give the overall big picture perspective of the overall compliance process and sort of where things fall in that process. All right, so first thing is, let's talk about what they look like. How to identify a heat pump water heater. And I like to say, if it looks like something that's related to R2-D2 from Star Wars, it's probably a heat pump water heater. Okay, as you can see, these are very sort of modern looking things, but there are some features to look for. Okay, first of all, things to realize is that it's 100% electric. There's no gas. All right, they are storage water heaters, which means there's a large tank, just like a standard storage gas water heater or a storage electric resistance water heater. And most of them have the water is heated by a heat pump, which is a refrigerant-based compressor, okay? But most of them also have electric resistance backup heating for when you need that extra boost. Now, that's very inefficient in terms of the use of electricity for heating water, but it's there just in case, because heat pumps don't heat water quite as fast. They're super, super efficient. In fact, they're more than 100% efficient. They're like 300% efficient, which sounds impossible, but it's not. But they do heat water very slowly compared to other, especially gas and electric resistance, okay? There's usually some very special controls. Because they heat water more slowly, there are certain controls are important. And then there's some really interesting things going on in terms of grid optimization and sort of using heat pump water heaters almost like a battery. When there's excess electricity available in the grid, you can sign up for a program through the utilities where they have access to the controls on your heat pump water heater, and they can turn the set temperature up and down to consume electricity when there's a glut of electricity. And then you have this, your water gets hotter than normal, and so you have the storage of hot water. How that pans out on your electric bills, I'm not exactly sure. I do know you get a big discount for participating in this program. So I think in the long run, it's a good thing. But of course, a lot of people don't like utilities having control over anything in their homes, which is understandable in some cases. And then just to control the operation of the heat pump itself. When things like Nest thermostat came out and people can control their thermostat with their phones. You know, who would have thought $300 thermostats would fly off the shelf? But there's apparently a lot of people are very sort of gadget oriented and thought that was a really cool thing. Well, most of the heat pump water heaters have come with a phone app, and you can control your heat pump water heater remotely through your phone. And so there's some really interesting things that can happen with that as well. And you know, knowledge is power, right? If the more you know about what's going on, and the more you're aware of what's going on, the more efficient you become at how you use things. So it's a really interesting sort of time that we're in. We used to just, you know, turn a little red dial on your water heater in your garage, and then never even think about it unless you had, you know, family came over for holidays or something. You ran out of hot water and you go out and turn it up a little bit. Well, now you can do it from anywhere in the world. Literally, you can control your heat pump water heater through your phone. So it's very interesting. All right. So some common characteristics. They mostly run in the 40 to 80 gallon range. For multifamily shared applications, there are larger ones. There's new ones come out every day, it seems like. When they're running in heat pump mode, they draw about 1,300 watts, okay? Kind of like a blow dryer when they're running in heat pump mode. When the electric resistance kicks in, it's usually quite a bit more. It's 4,000 to 5,000 watts when they kick in. Most of all the major manufacturers carry heat pump water heaters. There's a few manufacturers that specialize in heat pump water heaters, but all the well-known name brands for water heating manufacturers and a lot of HVAC manufacturers as well. I went to the big conference in Las Vegas, the big ACHR HVAC conference last year. And I would say the single most common thing that people were featuring in their booths were heat pump water heaters. It was pretty astounding. So they're a big deal. They first entered the market back in the 70s, you know, with the old OPEC embargo and the energy crisis we had back in the 70s. But they were kind of rushed when they manufactured them, and they didn't work very well. They weren't manufactured very well, and they got a really bad reputation back then. Well, things have changed a lot. Today, they're gaining traction. You're seeing a lot of them get installed with the California climate goals. They're very high efficiency, very low carbon, especially if you have solar panels on your house. They're an evolving technology. They're being improved all the time, and they're possible to power with renewable energy, your solar power, your solar panels and wind and all those other kinds of clean energy sources. And they're kind of in their third generation. So they've been improved quite a bit. The controls, the technology, the compressors on the heat pumps, all those have improved greatly over the years. And so they're greatly improved. So why you're going to see more electrification, as I mentioned, there's some state goals for decarbonization, reducing greenhouse gases. The building code is encouraging electrification. There's a lot of local ordinances. There's over 60 jurisdictions in California have adopted some sort of electrification programs, and they're throwing money at these things. There's rebates where it's almost free to install a heat pump water heater in some locations. There's incentives, there's tax credits, there's financing, all kinds of stuff going out there. So do your research, look into it, and you can get by. Even if you have to change out your electric panel on your house, there's actually extra rebates if that has to happen that will do that. There's also some really neat technology that allows you to not have to upgrade your electrical panel by prioritizing uses. So you can have it, for example, you can have, let's say your electric vehicle charging station and your electric dryer were on the same, you can put them on the same circuit. And when you need your dryer, it stops charging your car until your dryer's done. And so there's these shared circuits. So there's a lot of things like that, a lot of technologies coming out that can, you know, prevent you from having to, you know, upgrade your panel and things like that. All right, so there's two basic layouts or styles of heat pump water heaters. By far the most common is the integrated, and that's where the tank and the heat pump are all in one unit. So that's the one on the left, okay? And then there's also ones where the tank is separate from the heat pump. They're called split. heat pump water heaters. And if that little condenser down there looks familiar, it's almost exactly the same as a ducted or ductless mini split condenser. But it will either exchange refrigerant through refrigerant lines, and there's a heat exchanger inside the tank, or it will actually exchange hot water. The water will come to the heat pump, be heated up, and then sent back to the tank. The really cool thing about the split ones is you can put the tank anywhere. You could literally sheetrock it into a wall and forget about it. I mean, you'd have to get access to it eventually, and that's probably against code. But theoretically speaking, you don't need access to it. Okay, and so, but what we'll find out with the integrated ones, because the heat pump is built into it, it's pretty particular about where those things can be located. Okay, and we'll talk about that. So some of the features to look for in identifying an integrated heat pump water heater is the heat pump up on top. So it's going to be some sort of a separate box or unit. And what you're really going to see is these little louvers, because air has to pass through there. Air is going to come into the heat pump. The heat pump is going to extract heat from the air, and then the air is going to come out. And another way of saying extract heat from is to say cool it. So it's going to cool that air. So you're going to have room temperature air come in, or ambient air come in, and then cold air is going to come out. And you don't want these to be in a really enclosed, confined space, or that space will get really, really cold, and there's less heat to be able to pull out of that air. So it needs good circulation. It needs a good volume of air to work correctly. You'll also see some sort of a control panel, little digital control panel of some sort. Like I said, a lot of these also can be controlled by a phone app or something like that. Oh, and sometimes these louvers can actually be ducted too. So we'll talk about that too, but they don't necessarily have to be louvers, but they can actually be a duct coming in and then a louver coming out, or a duct coming in and a duct coming out. So they can actually pull air from a separate location. You've got these air vents, okay? There's gonna be a large storage tank of some kind. There's gonna be an electrical connection and no gas connection, all right? These do have to have the PT valves, the safety valves and all that other kind of stuff. They don't have to be elevated like a gas water heater does, or like the older gas water heaters do. And so they can actually take up less space. All right. On the split systems, there's no heat pump on top of the tank. It's a separate unit. It does have a large storage tank. It has a control panel. There's an electrical connection. There's no gas connection. And then the condenser is a separate unit. And then there's going to be some sort of water lines or refrigerant lines connecting between the condenser and the tank. Okay. All right. Now, what's the difference between that and just a good old fashioned electric resistance water heater? Well, they look very, very similar, but it's not going to have the heat pump on top, and it's not going to have a separate heat pump condenser, and it's only going to have the electric resistance elements, the upper and lower electric resistance elements. So that's pretty straightforward. All right. Let's see. Do we have any questions? Nope. Okay. Let's see here. And then gas water heaters, obviously, there's gonna be a flue vent, there's gonna be a gas line coming in, there's gonna be some sort of temperature adjustment knob, there's gonna be a gas connection, and sometimes there's electrical connection, sometimes they're not. It depends on the type of unit. This particular one is a direct vent. That's not as common a water heater, but definitely the flue gas is a dead giveaway. The flue gas pipe. All right. Tankless water heaters, pretty obvious. They hang on the wall. There's no tank. There's some sort of a gas pipe, unless it's the electric tankless water heaters. They're usually wall mounted. There's gonna be some sort of electrical panel, and there's gonna be a gas line coming into them. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, so installation requirements and considerations. This is not code stuff. This is more manufacturer's recommendations about where to put these. So you always have to refer to manufacturer's recommendations. Most of them are 240 volt, 30 amp. Okay. There are some that are 240 volt and only 15 amp. And there's some new ones that are 115 volt, 15 amp. Okay. So they can, and those are usually smaller ones for like ADUs and maybe for more than one water heater in a house and things like that. But they don't require the typically don't require the upgraded panel too. So that's an option. There's more and more of those coming out all the time. They do require some sort of ventilation. They get their heat from air. So they're going to need a supply of air, whether it's a large volume of air. So most manufacturers recommend between 750 and 1,000 cubic feet. Okay, that's actually less than a one-car garage. So a one-car garage is usually plenty of volume for a heat pump water heater. But like a closet is not, or maybe just a laundry room, that might not be enough. Okay. There are some that will say that's okay as long as it has a louver door in it with a high and low louvers and things like that. So again, this is all manufacturer's recommendations. So when you see one of these installed and you're questioning, you're going, I don't think it should be installed in this closet, you have to refer to manufacturer's recommendations. Okay. The preferred location is where the air is warm. So I live in the Sacramento area, and our garages get very, very hot during the summertime and stay fairly hot. Or at least stay warm. They don't get as cold as the outside. So garages are a great place for heat pump water heaters. They can be inside, but do remember that they give off cold air too. So you want to be conscious of that. They do require a condensate drain. Okay, they do. If the air is humid, when they cool the air, moisture condenses, and that. So they do have to have a condensate drain. You can see in this picture on this little PVC pipe up here is a condensate drain. And they're typically larger storage than a gas. So in other words, if you're replacing a 50-gallon gas, you probably want to go with a 70 or 80-gallon heat pump water heater. If you're replacing a 30-gallon gas water heater, you probably want to go with a 40 or 50-gallon heat pump water heater. So they're usually going to go with a larger tank. And again, that's because they don't heat as fast. And so if you're going to have a lot of draw off your water heater, you want a bigger supply of hot water. Okay. Do we have a question, Gray?
Yeah, we have two. The first is, what recommendations do you have for locations with enough space for ventilation? And what about small ADUs without a garage?
Yes, again, it's manufacturer's recommendations. You can put one in a small ADU. They make the ducted kind, so it really doesn't matter where they're actually located. So you can put those in a closet, but then you have to duct the air from somewhere. You can duct it from the attic, you can duct it from conditioned space, and then you can have the outlet, the cold air going to the outside. So there's a lot of different things. So it's really, there's a huge variety of units. And so I would just, if you're shopping for one, is just go to one of the major manufacturers and say, search for one that's recommended for smaller applications. But a one-car garage is if you have a one-car garage, that's plenty of volume for most of them. Okay. They also make the split units, so you can have the tank literally anywhere, and then the condenser sits outside. So there is no space volume recommendations or requirements for those. Okay. So yeah, shop around. And like I said, there's new ones coming out all the time. I know, I want to say, oh shoot, I forget the Bryant, no, I can't think of the name. They're starting to make smaller ones specifically for ADUs. Okay. So they're out there for sure. All right. All right, so we know what they look like. We know what they do. Now, how does the Energy Code deal with them? Okay, well, the Energy Code loves them. Let me put it that way. And so let's talk a little bit real quick about the Energy Code. Remember that there's the mandatory measures. Those are things you always have to do. You can't trade those off, if you're doing the performance approach or anything like that. And then after that, you pick a compliance path, okay? And you either pick the performance path or you pick the prescriptive path, okay? I like to call the prescriptive path the simple but strict path, and the performance is the complicated but flexible path. Most new construction and larger additions follow the performance path. In fact, new construction, I would say 99.99% of new construction follows the performance path. But on smaller additions and change outs and replacements and things like that, those generally always follow the prescriptive path, okay? So on the prescriptive path, there's a list of things to do, and you just follow that list. And on the performance path, you have to use a software program, and you model the house, and you can trade things off, but you cannot trade off mandatory measures. And if you use the prescriptive path, the things that are on the prescriptive list are kind of like mandatory measures because you have to do them. You can't trade them off. Okay. So those are our two paths. So in short, under the 2022 Energy Code, yes, you can install heat pump water heaters. They're super efficient and they're encouraged. We got a question? Let's see here.
Yeah, we have two questions in the chat. The first is, what is your experience with heat pump water heaters that don't have the resistance coils?
I don't have a lot of personal experience, but I'm on several Facebook groups. One of them is called Electrify Everything, which is pretty good. And there's a couple other ones where people are, honestly, I don't know of any that don't have it. I know people are disconnecting them. They're buying heat pump water heaters that have resistance electric coils and just disabling them and never needing them. They typically are, there's a lot of different control settings, and you can set it to heat pump only, or you can set it to emergency mode, or you can set it, there's a lot of different settings you can set in them. What we're finding is a lot of people don't need the resistance electric coils, but it doesn't hurt to have them there, if you just turn them off. And then the other question is, what temperature range do these need to function properly? Again, it varies widely. I know of people who have them installed in their garage in Minnesota, okay, where it gets below zero, and they seem to be working fine. I've not heard of any major complaints, but each one, they're designed for different applications. So if you live in a really, really cold area, you want to get one that's designed specifically for that. But if you're in 3C REN territory, you're golden. That's a perfect climate for heat pump water heaters. Is anywhere near the coast is a perfect climate. So you're good to go. All right. So the Energy Code loves heat pump water heaters, and you can replace a gas storage water heater with a heat pump water heater. Okay, that is definitely allowed. Oh, mandatory measures, section 110.3, heat pump water heaters must also follow the minimum efficiencies. So there are minimum efficiency levels of heat pumps that are allowed to be sold in California. And those are all on the list. There's a link here. You can click on that link. Let's see. And then the organization, for HVAC, air conditioners and furnaces and space heating heat pumps and stuff like that, it's AHRI is the organization that tests and certifies equipment. Well, for heat pump water heaters, it's called NEA, Northeast Energy Alliance. And that's their website there, NEA.org. Okay. And let's see. We're going to talk about their what NEA's website looks like, how you can actually go there and search a make and model number to get the efficiencies. So all domestic. So we're still in mandatory measures, and let's talk about pipe insulation. And this applies to all water heaters, by the way. This was a new requirement. They basically said, let's just follow the California Plumbing Code. There was some discrepancies on pipe insulation between the Energy Code and the Plumbing Code. And in the new code, they just said, let's just use the Plumbing Code. Let's just defer to the Plumbing Code. So that's a good simplification of the code. It's section 609.12. And what it says is the first 5 feet of cold water pipes from the storage, minimum of pipes less than or equal to 2 inches, the minimum wall thickness not less than the diameter of the pipe, greater than 2 inches, shall not be less than 2 inches of the insulation. Okay, so that's all straight out of the Plumbing Code. Then in the 2019 and 2022 Energy Codes, if you're not going to install a heat pump water heater, they want you to be able to in the future. And the best time to do that is when you're building the house. So if you're going to install a new water heater, whether that's in a new home or part of an addition, or maybe you're adding a water heater to a house, if you're installing a new water heater that's not a heat pump water heater, you have to basically prep it to be swapped out to a heat pump water heater in the future. Okay, so what it says is in the 2019 and 2022 Energy Codes have requirements for future heat pump water heaters when installing gas or propane storage water heater. The 2019 code required adequate electrical capacity to do that. The 2022 code goes even farther and says you have to have adequate electrical capacity, and that basically means reserves room in your circuit panel, okay? And plus, where you put that heat pump, where you put that gas water heater, you have to be able to swap it out with a heat pump water heater. Okay. You have to have access to the plumbing lines and all that other kind of stuff. So they basically realize that when you build a house, that house is going to be there for a long time. And at some point in the future, gas water heaters are probably going to go away, and you're going to have to switch to heat pump technology. And the best time to prep for that is now, right? So, like they say, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday. Well, the best time to prep your house for swapping out to newer technology is when you're building it, okay? Before you move in. Another mandatory measure, section 150.0 and 1, goes into the details of the requirements that's called electric ready. So if you're not installing a heat pump water heater, if you're installing a gas or propane water heater, here's what you have to do. You have to have room for a tank heat pump water heater, 2.5 by 2.5 by 7 feet tall. You have to have electrical capacity in the panel, and there are some additional plumbing requirements in terms of accessibility to the hot and cold pipes, okay? So the electrical and plumbing requirements vary depending on whether the location is more or less than 3 feet from the installed water heater. Note that the requirements for future upgrading to tankless in the 2019 codes have been removed. So in the 2019 code, they used to, the darling was, the darling of the energy code was tankless water heaters, and they wanted you to have the ability to upgrade to tankless water heaters. Well, guess what? They've changed their mind in the 2022 code, and now they would like you to prep for all electric and prep for heat pump water heaters. Now, if you install a heat pump water heater, you can completely ignore all this stuff, right? Because you've already got the heat pump water heater. So for future heat pump water heaters within 3 feet of a gas water heater, if that's within 3 feet, you must provide a dedicated 125 volt, 20 amp electrical receptacle, okay? A 122 40 volt 3 conductor, 10 gauge copper branch circuit within 3 feet of the water heater and accessible to the water heater with no obstructions. Both ends of the unused conductor shall be labeled with the word spare, electrically isolated, a reserved single pole circuit breaker in the electrical panel adjacent to the circuit breaker and the branch circuit in above, and label with the words for future 240 volt use. Okay, so they're basically saying pre-wire, stub it out, you know, so that when you do switch out, you can just connect it at both ends and off you go. A condensate drain that is no more than 2 inches higher than the base of the installed water heater and allows for natural draining without pump assistance. And then there's some other requirements in the 2019 code, or this aligns with the stuff in the 2019 code. So if you're used to that, it's basically the same stuff. Let's see, and then there's some piping requirements. If you're outside of 3 feet if where you plan to put the heat pump water heater is more than 3 feet away from where the gas water heater is, and that's usually a case of the gas water heater is a tankless water heater, so they might put it on the wall of the garage, but where they're planning to have the place for the heat pump water heater is more than 3 feet away, there's some additional requirements related to the piping. Hot water supply pipe coming out of the gas or propane water heater shall be routed first through the designated heat pump water heater location. Okay, and usually what I've seen is they just come out of the wall and then they go back into the wall. The hot and cold water piping shall be exposed and readily accessible for future installation of a heat pump water heater. Okay, so just basically stub it out. All right, so in the performance path, and that is typically going to be for new constructions, it's going to be for ADUs, and it's going to be for larger additions when the architect or the builder will hire an energy consultant and they'll create a computer model. Okay, that's what we're talking about, the performance approach. So heat pump water heaters can be modeled by the performance approach, either on an individual water heater per unit basis, or there are some opportunities where you can have a shared heat pump water heater for multifamily buildings. In some cases, they actually result in an energy credit, which means you get, it's better than the house you're being compared to. So it can help you actually comply with the energy code and offset other features. The 2022 Energy Code no longer allows tanked gas or propane water heaters for new construction under the prescriptive path. Okay, so we changed here. So this previous slide was the performance path. That's where you use the computer model. The next slide is the prescriptive path, which is very uncommon for new construction. It's common for newer additions. So you probably won't see too many of these, but under the prescriptive path, you cannot install a gas water heater. Okay. Now that's not to say you're not allowed to install a gas water heater. It just means you have to go to the performance path, model the gas water heater, probably get penalized for it, but you can make it up some other way with other energy features. Okay. All right. Now, prescriptive for new construction and additions. What are the requirements? Well, again, this is the prescriptive approach, not very common for new construction, and actually not very common for larger additions that might include adding a water heater, but you might see the prescriptive path used for converting a garage into an ADU, or converting a garage into something where you might be installing a new water heater. I can't imagine why they would install a new water heater and not just use the existing one. But anyways, if that's the case, here's what you have to do. So 240 volt heat pump water heater located in garage conditioned space. These are the requirements. In climate zones 1 or 16, you have to also have something called compact hot water distribution system. In climate zone 16, you have to also have something called a drain water heat recovery system. Again, this is just prescriptive. The best way to think of this is, if you're building a new house, you don't have to do this. You're using the performance approach, but this is what you're being compared to. So if you don't do this, then you're going to be, you have to offset it to do something better. Okay. Let's see, let me check the chat here. Still good. All right. Let's see. So heat pump water heater class plus this. In other climate zones, or in a single 240 volt heat pump water heater meeting the tier 3 requirement. In climate zone 16, we've got this drain water heat recovery system. Okay. Solar water heating system with electric backup, meeting criteria. That's an option. In climate zones 3, 4, 13, and 14, gas or propane tankless instantaneous water heaters can be installed. Okay, so there are certain climate zones where prescriptively you can install a gas or propane tankless or instantaneous water heater. For dwelling units with conditioned floor less than 500 square feet, you can use an instantaneous electric water heater, which is interesting. Those are typically little small ADUs. And for dwelling units, 1 bedroom or less, you can do a 120 volt heat pump water heater. All right, so again, not super common. Think of these as what you're being compared to. Don't think of these as what you have to do for new construction and additions. It's very uncommon that you would have an addition small enough to use the prescriptive approach where you'd also be adding a new water heater. Okay. All right. Alterations, however, are very, very common. This is very common. This you do have to worry about. This is something you're going to have to pay attention to and enforce when it comes up. So in the prescriptive alterations, the 2022 Energy Code does allow gas and propane water heating systems as well as heat pump water heater. Okay. And what it really boils down to is, what is there to begin with? What does the house, what is being replaced in the house? Okay. If it's a gas water heater, you can put in a gas water heater, you can put in a heat pump water heater. If it's an electric resistance water heater, you can basically put in anything you want. You can replace it with whatever you want. All right. That's the short story, the short version. All right. So if you're replacing a gas water heater, you can install one of the following: a natural gas or propane water heating system. Okay, that's because that's what you already got there, so you can do that. But you can also put in a heat pump water heater. That's the base efficiency. That's the lower end efficiency. But if you do that, in order for it to be as cost effective as the gas water heater that you're replacing, there's a couple extra things you have to do. There's a requirement here for where the tank is located. There's a requirement for being on a rigid insulated pad. And then it has to have the ability to communicate. Okay, that's one of the smart Wi-Fi based water heaters. So the choice is basically between that or a tier 3, a higher efficiency. So it's 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, or 3 basically. Okay, if you're replacing a gas water heater, if we'll talk about the NEA tier 3. That's basically a higher efficiency. So if you do higher efficiency, you don't have to do all this other stuff with the communicating and the pad and where it's located and stuff like that. So just go with a tier 3. That's actually, honestly, that's what most people are going with anyway, are the tier 3s. If the existing water heater is an electric resistance heater, you can replace it with an electric resistance water heater. But the question is, why would you want to? There's so many rebates out there. You've already got the electrical, you've already got the space. There's so many rebates out there that people are basically throwing money at you to put in a heat pump water heater. And so you could do that. But you could, if you really wanted to, say it was a rental unit or something like that, you could put an electric resistance water heater, but it is not recommended. A water heating system. And then number 5 is this catch-all, because technology is changing so quickly. And there's so many options out there. There's a catch-all in here that says, if you have something fancy you want to put in and you're not sure if it's allowed, ask the Energy Commission. And then the Energy Commission, the executive director of the Energy Commission, basically the staff will look at it and do a study, do a report and say, we recommend that you approve this. And then the executive director says, I approve this system as a reasonable replacement for whatever was in there. Okay. So they just put this catch-all at the end there. The bottom line is, if you have a gas water heater, you can replace it with a gas water heater, or a base efficiency heat pump water heater with a few extra little things, a little extra features to make it more efficient, or a high efficiency tier 3 heat pump water heater. Okay. All right. There's a new rating. You're probably used to seeing energy factor on water heaters. There's a new rating called a uniform energy factor. Anything manufactured after June of 2017, that was a while ago. So you pretty much assume all new ones are going to have this UEF. It's called uniform energy factor. All they really did is change the way they test water heaters. And the test is more appropriate to real life applications. And so the energy factor is a better number for predicting energy consumption. Okay. So just look for that. If you see something that only says energy factor on it, you need to find the UEF. Don't try to compare the two. All right, they're two different numbers. It's kind of like SEER and EER on air conditioners. They're two different numbers, and you can't compare them to each other. Okay. All right, NEA is Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. I think I said Northeast. It's Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. It's a collaboration of the Pacific Northwest organizations. They fund energy efficiency research. And they also are they've taken the responsibility for testing and having a large database of all heat pump water heaters. So that's where you go to find out efficiencies. You can look up make and model numbers and find out if they're tier 3 rated or tier 2 or whatever. And they have some special advanced water heater specifications. Okay. So they're encouraging manufacturers to add certain features to their water heaters, and by giving them better ratings and better tier ratings and things like that. They're on version 8, which means they've come quite a ways. Okay. Here's what the database looks like. All right, there's different tiers. Tier 3 used to be the highest, and now there's tier 4 and tier 5. And it just kind of shows you what the different ratings are. It's not just the efficiency rating. So for a tier 1, the minimum UEF is 2.0. For tier 2, it's 2.3. For tier 3, it's this. But there's more to it than just that. There's some other features that are required in order to hit that tier. So tier 2 is tier 1 plus minimal use of electric elements. So they have to have special controls, compressor shutdown notification, a 10-year warranty, condensate management, and stuff like that. And then demand response, which is having the ability to have the utility control the temperature settings, is optional for tier 2. But then you'll see in tier 3 that becomes required. And here you can just kind of see how the tiers change. They go all the way up to 3.5 energy factor. Okay, that's very impressive. Sorry, this is what the database looks like. It's sorted by, you can sort it by whatever you want to, but the columns are brand, model, volume, recommended household size, which varies a lot. Just a suggestion. Energy factor, uniform energy factor. You won't see too many with the energy factor. That's the old, those will be older units. And then what date they qualified. So you can go to that website, you can search for make and model number. If you're an enforcement agency, I recommend you ask them to print this out for you. You could go and look it up yourself, but it can be kind of tedious to do that. So just say, what did you install? Please print out the NEA database that shows what it is, so I can look at it. Okay, so it's pretty easy to do. Okay, I forgot there was this stuff in here. Let's talk about the forms. Lots of forms with the energy code. There's the CF2Rs and the CF3Rs, and the CF1Rs. The CF1R is the certificate of compliance. That tells you what you're supposed to do. The CF2R is the certificate of installation. That tells you what was installed. And the CF3R is for HERS verification. There's not a lot of HERS verification for water heaters, okay? There's a couple HERS verifications for water heating systems, for the piping of the water heaters. There's some special credits you can take for designing and installing a water heater system that has very short runs, that has extra pipe insulation, that has special features on it, like the drain water heat recovery device. Those are all HERS verified, but they're not the water heater themselves. It's more of the distribution system that are HERS verified. So for most water heater replacements and even new construction, it's going to be enforced by the building inspector. So you got to look at the CF1R to see what is required. CF2R is filled out and signed by the installer to say what they installed. So that's them taking responsibility for it. But then you also have to check it in the field to make sure it matches both of those things. Okay. And then whatever HERS verification there is, the HERS rater will take care of that. All right, so performance approach. Bear with me 1 second. My Zoom controls are blocking. There we go. So performance approach, pretty much all new construction, new homes, and most additions will be performance. So in the plan review, the CF1R is called the CF1R Perf 01. That's generated by the software. And it will have a section about water heaters. You want to go and you want to look at that section and you want to make sure that it's always good if what they called out on the CF1R is shown on the plans, but it's very important that it be checked in the field as well. Okay, so when you go on the field, look at the water heater, make sure it meets or exceeds the requirements of the CF1R. And then the CF2R will be filled out. Make sure the CF2R gets filled out and signed by the installer. That's them taking responsibility for that feature. So if down the road, if there turns out to be any issues, they know who to go back and talk to. So that's the CF2R. This is what the CF1R looks like. Okay. The CF1R Perf 01, the number of pages vary depending on the complexity of the project. But towards the back, after the walls and the windows and after the HVAC, I believe, no, I think it's before the HVAC actually, you'll get to the heat pump water heater section. There's a section about water heaters, and then there's a section about water heating distribution. Okay. Now in the water heater section, what you're looking for is the tank volume and whether there's a brand or not. Okay. Where is the inlet source? Okay. So you're going to look on here and you want to make sure that this is consistent with what they did in the field. All right. There are some, some of the sort of categories of meet or exceed. Generally speaking, if you put in a smaller water heater, that's better than putting in a larger water heater. So if they've modeled a 50 and then install a 70, that's probably that they need to remodel that. Okay. They need to check that. Okay, so that's the section you go to there. Descriptive approach for small additions that happen to be adding a new water heater. Again, that's not super common. The CF1R is called the ADD02 or the ADD01. Let's see. Basically, make sure that the water heater they're installing meets the prescriptive requirements. Okay, and then that's called out on the CF2Rs, and then for field verification, make sure they installed the right water heater. Okay, pretty straightforward on that one. Here's what the prescriptive form looks like. It's the CF1R ADD01. There's section L for water heating, and it describes what's allowed. Okay, it's either a lower tier water heater or a tier B or higher water heater. So here's all the requirements right there in front of you. And then they just write this in by hand. It's just filled out by hand or typed into a PDF file or something like that. It's not generated by software like the CF1R Perf 01 is. Okay. For alterations, for changeouts, the CF1R is called the Alt-05. If you've done HVAC changeouts, you're probably familiar with the CF1R Alt-02, okay? The Alt-05 is specific to water heater changeouts that have no HERS verification. All you really need to make sure is that, and it's called out on the form, is that they install the type that they say. If they say they're going to install a heat pump water heater and then they install electric resistance water heater, that's not a good thing. If they already have a gas water heater and they say they're going to install a heat pump water heater, but then install a gas, that might be okay. But then why did they say they were going to install it? So the documentation just has to be consistent. Okay. Here's the CF1R Alt-01. That's if they're doing a bunch of other stuff to the house. Here's the CF1R Alt-05. All right. And it's just got the water heater section O's for water heating. And it just spells out what you can do. Okay. What's allowed is all spelled out right on the form, which is nice. And then one of the handouts, and we'll talk about this in a minute, one of the handouts was the it's a checklist for plan checking. Okay, we'll show you that. Let's see, on the CF2R, this is the form filled out by the installer. There are some sections, design dwelling unit, water heating system information, design dwelling unit, heat pump water heater system information, and then installed dwelling unit. So design means, what does it say on the CF1R? What are they supposed to do? That shows up right on the CF2R. And then down in section B is what they say they actually installed. So you can look up above and see what they were supposed to do, and then look down at the bottom and see what they actually did. So it's right there visually. You can look right up at the other one and say, okay, it's very helpful. That's on the CF2R PLB02. That's the main form for documenting the water heating system that was installed. Okay, so the section A should match the CF1R, what they're supposed to do, and section B needs to be better than equal to or section A, right on the same form. Same sort of thing for the PLB22. That's if there's HERS verification. Water heating system, it's the same sort of thing. Section B is going to be what was installed. Section D is what installed, and section E is what's installed. Okay, and there'll be, this is all HERS verified, so this is pretty much handled by the HERS rater. And that would just be for the distribution stuff. Okay, some resources, some tools that you can use for permitting and for compliance out in the field. Here are some tools. So BayREN developed this. It can be used by any building department. It's called the Heat Pump Water Heater Guide for staff and applicants. And it's basically an assistance sheet. And it's not, this one is specific to heat pump water heaters, but the other ones are more for generic, just water heating in general. And it basically, everything we just talked about in these slides, they just put it on a piece of paper that you can hand to people. So when people come in, they go, why can't I install an electric, why can't I replace my gas water heater with an electric resistant water heater? You hand them this piece of paper, you say, here's what. It's also useful for enforcement, the enforcement side of it as well. There's a link here to it. It's one of the handouts that Gray put in the chat as well. Okay. And let's see. Can you talk about the process requirements for replacing a gas water heater with a heat pump water heater and no other remodeling being done? Okay, so good question. So basically that would be the CF1R Alt-05. Go back a page or two. Here, CF1R Alt-05. Okay, here's the 1R. And then here's the CF2R Alt-05. So basically these, so the CF1R says, what are you planning to do? And you only fill out this section J, okay, of the Alt-01. Section J, just say, this tells you what you're allowed to do, and this says what you plan to do. And then over here, you fill out what you did. All right, so here's where they would put the actual make and model number of the installed water heater. Okay, let's see, field type water heaters, field name. I think there's more to it that has the make number, ID, type, type, volume, fuel type, number of water heaters in the system. Is natural gas connected to the existing water heater? So that's one of the criteria, okay? So that's basically what you do is CF1R, what you're supposed to do, that's where you get your permit. CF2R, field inspection when you're done before you close it out. Get the CF2R signed by the installer, okay? These are technically optional. They're helpful for figuring out what you're supposed to do, and it's helpful for figuring out if they did the right thing or not. So it's up to you. If you can do this some other way and document these same things, you don't actually have to supply these for just a simple water heater replacement, okay? But when you talk about HVAC replacement, when you start getting the HERS verification and stuff like that, it's very different, and it's a lot more complicated. But for water heater replacement, this goes along with window replacements as well, roof replacements, a lot more simplified, and the forms are actually optional. But you can also do this. This tool here is very useful. It walks you through the process. It tells you what's allowed, what's not allowed, and those sorts of things. And here's all the same documentation as what you would fill out on the CF2Rs and the CF1R, okay? So pick your, how you wanna do it. If you're used to requiring the forms, if people are used to having the forms when they submit for a permit, continue doing that. That's probably a good way to do it. But if you also wanna kind of simplify the process, and just make sure that things are being documented so that you know what's being installed is the right stuff, okay? This is a more generic, this isn't specific to heat pump water heaters, this is more generic water heater replacement. So if they're replacing gas with gas and things like that, this would be something you could use, okay? And then this is kind of an interesting thing. This is a permit template that was developed by BayREN, and I think it's being used. It is being used in several jurisdictions up in BayREN territory, which is San Francisco Bay Area. And it's a permit template. If you want to adopt this, great. You can modify it. You can edit it. Do whatever you want to. But it's one of the things that was handed out, and it just kind of documents everything that you need to know. Okay. And it allows you allows the permit applicant to fill out whatever they need to. There's a little place here to show a little floor plan of where the water heater is located and things like that. Okay, so that's kind of cool. All right, best practices. Best practices for energy code enforcement. Require and review a CF1R permit application. Again, it's not required. That is a best practice though, okay, for just a simple water heater replacement. For HVAC replacements that involve any sort of HERS verification, and most of them do for new construction, obviously for additions, those sorts of stuff, you do want a CF1R, but the code does say that CF1Rs are optional for simple replacements, okay? Encourage the use of individual dwelling units and heat pump water heaters in the building code. Let's see, to ensure compliance, provide permitting assistance documents. So the handouts that we talked about, make sure that that's getting, take advantage of those, use those if you can, and you're welcome to edit those too. They're PDFs, but you can edit them. You can put your building department logo on them. BayREN puts them out there for people to use. They encourage their use, so feel free. Make sure the installer or HERS verification, make sure they complete the CF2Rs and CF3Rs. Again, that's a best practice sort of thing. Now in new construction, you definitely want the CF1R, you definitely want the CF2Rs, you definitely want the CF3Rs, okay? All right. Building inspection. So collect the CF2Rs. Again, if it's an addition or a new construction, that's a very important process. We have a class specifically on how to use the HERS registry. If the project and all new construction requires at least one HERS test, so all the forms have to be registered with a HERS provider, how do you keep track of all those forms? Use the HERS registry. It's an amazing tool. We have a class specifically on that. I encourage you to look into that. It's a wonderful tool for keeping track of all the forms, okay? The HERS registries is the two HERS providers have their own registry. So whichever one the project is registered with, you can call it up on your phone. You can look out for green dots and red dots to tell if the forms have been completed and stuff like that. So that's very important. If gas or propane water heater is being installed in new construction, confirm the requirements, the mandatory measures for electric ready for stubbing out, basically for a heat pump water heater, make sure those are there. Okay. If they install the heat pump water heater, make sure it meets the efficiency requirements. By the way, on the performance approach, you can model a specific water heater. You can put the make and model number in the software and it will run it with that water heater and give you probably extra credits. So if they do that and you see a specific make and model number shown on the CF1R, that's what they have to install. Okay. And so that's what they're saying. And you can also model, you don't have to model the model number, but you can model a really high efficiency, one of those 3.5 UEFs I showed you, the tier 5. If they model that and they're taking credit for that high efficiency, they have to install that. So make sure that what they installed matches what's shown on the CF1R, especially in the performance approach. If they're using the prescriptive approach and they're not installing the high efficiency water heater, check to see what those other requirements are, like the pad, and where they can locate it and things like that. Okay, and those are actually shown right on the forms. Remember, I showed you that. Make sure the installation meets manufacturer's recommendations. So that in terms of the required volume, whether it's ducted, is the volume big enough? Is it in a closet with louvers? All that kind of stuff. There's no code requirement for that. That's all manufacturers require. It basically, the manufacturer says, if you want it to be as efficient as we say it is, you have to install it like this. Okay, so follow those requirements. So best practices. All right, some more resources for just general energy efficiency. And I've done this in record time. I really am. I'm going to finish early. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and we'll even probably give you a few extra minutes back in your day. But do check out the Energy Code ACE website if you have not, for all kinds of energy code related stuff. There's some really great tools there. Lots of trigger sheets, lots of fact sheets, lots of good stuff there. Definitely check out Energy Code ACE. We cooperate with them quite a bit. Energy Code ACE, by the way, is funded by the investor-owned utilities. They have a big budget, and they provide a lot of really, really good stuff. Okay. Additional training for BayREN, you can go to BayREN.org. Gray's going to show you some more information about 3C REN training. Okay, but BayREN has some. You don't have to be in BayREN territory to do BayREN training. In fact, we had someone from out of state actually watching a BayREN class the other day, which was interesting. But we have a lot of great classes on HERS registry. I mentioned navigating the energy code, additions, how the energy code treats electrification. They're all between 60 and 90 minutes, nice and short. You can fit into your day. And then Energy Code ACE has some classes. Energy Code ACE classes tend to be much longer and more involved. So if you want to really dive deep into a particular topic on energy code, like commercial lighting, for example, you're having to enforce commercial lighting stuff, they have some really, really deep questions, or sorry, deep classes that go really deep into those topics. Okay. All right, thank you for attending. We won't force the poll on you, or we have a quiz on the BayREN classes. We won't do that to you. If you have any questions, you can contact me here at codes@bayren.org. It'll actually go to an email address, and then they figure out who it needs to go to, and it'll probably come to me. All right, great. I think these are your slides now.
Yes, so if anyone is interested in receiving AIA or ICC credit for this course, please email me. I will be sure to follow up with the slides, recording, and another link to the handouts, as well as a survey from 3C REN about the course. It just helps us out. It's really brief to take. And here are a few of our upcoming courses. We have a course on the new energy code for multifamily on the 6th, high performance building and careers. This is a series, but the first class is also on the 6th. Heat recovery, ventilation, and existing multifamily. A course on electrification products for Central Coast climate specifically. And then Russ will be back at the end of next month with the Intro to Residential HVAC Design and those ACA manuals. I see a question about our rebates through 3C REN. So 3C REN has two different residential direct install rebate programs. The first is for multifamily. If you are no property owner or manager with 5 or more units, we offer a number of rebates to upgrade or replace appliances with high efficiency electric. And then our single family program, If you are a homeowner that is interested in upgrading your appliances, you can go to our website and fill out an interest form. We are also looking for more contractors to enroll in our program. Our contractors actually get the energy credit and rebates applied to them, and they can choose to pass it to their customers. But if you or you know someone that is a contractor that already does energy efficiency installs and upgrades, then they can apply to be a contractor with us and serve the Central Coast community while being compensated for the metered energy savings that their customers receive as a result. So that is all from me. And then we do have plenty of time, like you said, Russ, if we want to open it up for additional Q&A.
Yeah. There are any more questions? Lay them on us. Let's see. Let me open the chat. There we go. And if not, thank you guys very much for attending. We appreciate your time. Hope we'll see you in a future class. Oh, it's something occurred to me after I had answered a question. There was a question about heat pump water heaters with no resistance electric. I remembered that one of the ones that doesn't have electric resistance backup is the Sandin unit, that split unit. Sandin, their heat pumps are very strong. Their compressor systems are very strong, so they do heat quite well, and they don't need electric resistance. And so that's the only one that comes to mind. But like I said, and the same thing with heat pump space heating. In most of California, certainly in the 3C REN territory, you really don't need electric resistance backup, even for space heating. But you can install them, and if you properly size your equipment, it should heat the house just fine, purely on electric heat pump. Okay, so there you go. All right, thanks, Judy. Do people complain about the noise? Good question. They do make a little bit of noise. They sound a lot like a dormitory refrigerator, if you've ever heard one of those. They have a compressor inside of them, and they have a little fan. They're not as loud. They're not as loud as your large refrigerator in your house. They're not that loud. They're not as loud as, say, a chest freezer. They're as loud as a small refrigerator. So you'll hear a little compressor will turn on. You'll hear a little fan come on. And so you do, if you're putting them inside your house in a closet, you might want to be conscious of that. Which is funny because we have a gas water heater in our house, and it's adjacent to our TV room, and that sucker is loud. When that gas water heater goes off, you got to turn up the TV. So I think if we replace it with a heat pump water heater, it would actually not be as loud as the gas water heater when it comes on. So.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any questions. Feel free to send any follow-up questions to me or to the info@3CREN email or to Russ, and we'll do our best to answer. But otherwise, I think we can wrap up for today. Thank you all so much for joining us.